Be me, 48 years old. Ted, that's the name. Married to my wife, Margaret, for over 2 decades. One daughter, Judy. She just turned 20. I'm an engineer, not the cool Silicon Valley type, the other kind. The kind that deals with machinery that's bigger than your car and louder than a rock concert. I spend my days in a world of concrete, steel, and precise calculations. Things either work or they don't. A pipe holds pressure or it bursts. A circuit is complete or it's open. There's not a lot of room for interpretation. I like it that way. It's a good living, not glamorous, but it's honest work. It paid for our house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It paid for the trees Margaret planted in the backyard when we first moved in, the ones that are now taller than the roof. It paid for every school trip, every set of braces, every birthday party for Judy. My life has a simple loop. Wake up before the sun does. Go to work. Solve problems. Come home. Fix whatever's broken around the house. Spend some time with my wife. Go to sleep. Repeat. For more than 20 years, this loop has been the engine that powers our family. I never thought of it as a burden. It's just what a man does. You build a life, and then you maintain it. Judy was always a bright kid. Smart, funny, a little bit of a dreamer. I remember teaching her how to ride her bike on our street, holding the seat until my back ached, then finally letting go and watching her pedal away, wobbling but triumphant. I remember helping her with her science fair projects, building little volcanoes and potato clocks on the kitchen table. We were close. I thought we were anyway. Then she went off to college a couple of years ago. We were so proud. First person in my family to go to a big university. We helped her move into her dorm. I assembled her cheap particle board furniture. She put up posters. Margaret made her bed. It felt like a milestone, a natural progression, the next step in the life we'd been building for her. The first year was pretty normal. She'd call home, talk about her classes, her new friends, the terrible food in the cafeteria. When she came home for holidays, she was still our Judy. But somewhere in the second year, things started to shift. It was subtle at first. A new way of talking, new words started creeping into her vocabulary. Words like problematic and discourse and systemic. She'd be watching a movie with us, an old classic I've seen a dozen times. And out of nowhere, she'd announce that the film was a product of its toxic patriarchal origins. Margaret and I would just look at each other. At first, I thought it was just a phase. College kids trying on new ideas like they try on new clothes. I'd try to engage with her, have a discussion. I'd say something like, well, it was a different time, and try to explain the context. But it was like talking to a wall. She had these prepackaged arguments that she'd fire off, and there was no getting through. The phone became a permanent extension of her hand. Even when she was home, she wasn't really there. She was in some other world, scrolling endlessly, her face illuminated by the blue light of the screen, the phone that I paid for, on the family plan that I managed, using the Wi-Fi that I had installed. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just a utility, like water or electricity. The family dinners started changing. They used to be the one time a day we'd all properly connect. Margaret would talk about her garden. I'd talk about some challenge at work. Judy would tell us about her day. Now they felt like tribunals, and I was the one on trial. Everything I said was scrutinized. If I mentioned a female colleague at work, Judy would ask if she was being paid the same as the men. If I talked about a tough project, she'd talk about the inherent aggression in male-dominated workplaces. It was exhausting. I started talking less, just wanting to eat my meal in peace. Margaret tried to be the peacemaker. She'd say, "Now, Judy, let's have a pleasant dinner," in a soft voice. But that just made Judy double down. She'd accuse Margaret of being complicit, of having internalized misogyny. Imagine that, accusing her own mother, the woman who packed her lunch every day for 12 years, of hating women. Margaret would just get this hurt look on her face and go quiet. The tension in our once peaceful house started to become a physical thing. You could feel it in the air. A few months back, maybe it was in the spring, things really started to escalate. Her car, a 10-year-old sedan I'd bought her so she could get to her part-time job and come home on weekends, suddenly became a monument to fossil-fueled patriarchal dominance. I had spent a whole weekend fixing the brakes on that car. I checked the oil, rotated the tires. I did it because I wanted her to be safe. And here she was, reciting some slogan she'd read online. I tried to be patient. I really did. I'd sit down and say, "Judy, let's talk about this. Where is this coming from?" And she'd just launch into another lecture. It wasn't a conversation. She wasn't interested in my perspective. She was just downloading information into the room. She talked about toxic masculinity a lot. According to her, pretty much everything I did fell under this category. Working hard to provide for my family? That was me performing a toxic gender role to assert my dominance. Teaching her how to check her own tire pressure? I was imposing a masculine framework on a simple task. Fixing the leaky faucet in the bathroom? I was reinforcing the stereotype that men are the only capable ones in the house. It was insane. I was just being a husband and a father. I was doing the things my own dad taught me to do. You take care of your home. You take care of your family. It's not complicated. But in her world, it was all part of some grand, sinister design. One evening, I made the mistake of trying to talk to her about her future. She was in a sociology program, and I was genuinely curious about what she planned to do after graduation. I asked her if she'd thought about internships, or what kind of jobs her degree would lead to. It was a normal dad question. The reaction was explosive. She looked at me with genuine contempt. She said that my obsession with jobs and careers was a symptom of a sick, capitalist, patriarchal system. She told me she wasn't going to be a wage slave in my world. I just sat there, my fork halfway to my mouth. I asked, "So what is the plan then? How are you going to support yourself?" Her answer, "That's the kind of question that comes from a place of privilege." I wanted to shout. I wanted to stand up and list every single thing in that room that my wage slave job had paid for. The chair she was sitting on, the plate she was eating from, the electricity powering the lights. But I didn't. I just bit my tongue. For Margaret's sake. I could see the stress was getting to my wife. She was walking on eggshells in her own home. She'd try to steer conversations to safe topics like the weather or a TV show, but Judy would always find a way to bring it back to her new favorite subject, how broken and unfair the world was, and how men like me were the reason. The real kicker, the thing that truly baffled me, was the complete lack of self-awareness. She would sit there, typing furiously on a brand new laptop that I bought her for school, complaining about capitalism. She would wear expensive clothes that Margaret had picked out for her, and talk about the evils of consumer culture. She would condemn every aspect of my life, while simultaneously reaping every single benefit of it. It felt like a betrayal, not a dramatic, overt one, but a slow, creeping one, like the daughter I knew was being replaced by a stranger, an angry ideologue who saw me not as her father, but as a symbol, an oppressor. I kept telling myself it was a phase. She'd graduate, enter the real world, and all this academic nonsense would fade away. But it was only getting worse. Her visits home became less frequent. When she did come, she'd spend most of her time locked in her room, on video calls with her college friends. I could hear them through the door, a chorus of young voices, all using the same buzzwords, all reinforcing the same narrow worldview. An echo chamber, and I was paying for the high-speed internet that made it all possible. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The breaking point came a few weeks ago, on a Friday. I'd had an incredibly difficult week at work. We were behind schedule on a major project. A client was threatening penalties, and I'd been putting in 12-hour days to get us back on track. On Thursday night, I barely slept. I was at my desk at 5 a.m. reviewing schematics. But we did it. We pulled it off. On Friday afternoon, we hit our target. The client was happy, my boss was relieved, and my team was ecstatic. It was a huge victory, born from stress, exhaustion, and teamwork. I came home that evening feeling tired but deeply satisfied. The kind of satisfaction you only get from solving a hard problem. I walked in the door, and the first thing I saw was Judy, home for the weekend. She was at the kitchen table, scrolling on her phone, a scowl on her face. Margaret was in the kitchen, quietly making dinner. The mood was already tense. I tried to be cheerful. I put my briefcase down and said, "Big news? We finally cracked that problem at the plant. The project is back on schedule." Margaret smiled. "Oh, Ted, that's wonderful. I know how much that was weighing on you." I looked at Judy, expecting at least a nod. Congrats, Dad. Something. She didn't look up from her phone. She just said, "So you succeeded in furthering the agenda of a multinational corporation that probably exploits workers in developing countries." And that was it. All the satisfaction, all the pride from my hard-won victory just evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, heavy feeling in my gut. I looked at her, really looked at her. This young woman, living in a comfortable house I paid for, eating food I bought, using technology I provided, had the audacity to pass judgment on the very work that made her comfortable life possible. I didn't say anything. I just went upstairs and got changed. Dinner was a quiet affair for about 5 minutes. Then Judy cleared her throat, put her phone down on the table, and looked directly at me. It was the kind of look that said she was about to make a grand pronouncement. "Dad," she began, her voice dripping with the condescending patience of a lecturer addressing a slow student. "We need to have a serious conversation about your role in this family." Margaret immediately tensed up. "Judy, honey, can we not do this tonight? Your father had a very long week." "That's the whole point, Mom," she shot back, not taking her eyes off me. "His work, his entire identity, is built on a foundation of patriarchy." I just kept eating my pasta. I decided I wasn't going to engage. I didn't have the energy. "You benefit from a system that has oppressed women for centuries," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "Your success as an engineer, your position as the head of the household, it's all unearned privilege. It comes at the expense of women." I took a sip of water. I could feel my jaw tightening. I thought about the years of night classes I took to get my certifications. I thought about the weekends I spent on site while my friends were at barbecues. I thought about the promotion I was passed over for early in my career and how I had to work twice as hard to prove myself. Unearned privilege. The words echoed in my head. "What I've come to realize," she said, leaning forward as if sharing a profound truth, "is that for us to move forward, for this family to heal from these toxic dynamics, you need to acknowledge that." I finally looked at her. "Acknowledge what, Judy?" Her expression was dead serious. "You need to apologize." I almost laughed. It was so absurd. "Apologize for what?" I asked, my voice flat. "For your complicity in the patriarchy," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You need to apologize to me and to Mom for the privilege you hold over us, for the ways your toxic masculinity has shaped our lives." I looked over at Margaret. She looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. She was just staring at her plate, pushing a piece of broccoli around with her fork. I turned back to Judy. The anger I'd been suppressing for months started to bubble up. But when I spoke, my voice was dangerously calm. "Let me see if I understand this," I said, putting my fork and knife down. "You want me to apologize for working 60 hours a week so you can go to school and learn how to resent me for working 60 hours a week?" Her face hardened. "You're doing it again. You're twisting my words and refusing to engage with the actual issue. This isn't about money." "Isn't it?" I said, my voice getting a little louder. "This whole house is about money. The lights, the water, the food, the tuition for your college, the laptop you're writing your papers on, the phone you get your ideas from. Where do you think that comes from?" "That's a capitalist talking point," she scoffed. "You're using finances to deflect from your moral responsibility." That was the phrase that did it. Moral responsibility. This was no longer my daughter talking. This was a script, a manifesto. She didn't see me, her father. She saw a villain from one of her textbooks. And in that moment, something inside me just snapped. Not in a loud, angry way, in a quiet, decisive way. The engineer in my head took over. I saw the problem. I had analyzed the variables. The current approach was failing. It was time for a new solution. I looked at her, this angry stranger sitting at my dinner table, and all the frustration, all the hurt, all the disappointment coalesced into a single, simple thought. An epiphany. You don't argue with a belief system. You can't reason with a dogma. You can only change the conditions that allow it to flourish. I had been trying to win an argument. But this wasn't an argument to be won. It was a system to be dismantled. Her system. The one I was funding. I looked at my wife, then back at my daughter. I took a deep breath. The lecture was over. Class was about to begin. I stood up from the dinner table. I didn't say a word. I just walked out of the dining room. I could hear Judy's voice behind me. "See, this is what I'm talking about. He can't even face the truth. He's running away." I wasn't running away. I was heading for the source of the problem. I walked down the short hallway to my home office, where the internet modem and router were blinking innocently on a shelf. the digital umbilical cord that connected my daughter's mind to the echo chamber that had poisoned it. I reached behind the shelf and felt for the power cords, one for the modem, one for the router. With two sharp tugs, the blinking green lights went dark. Silence. I stood there for a second in the quiet office. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control again. I wasn't just reacting. I was acting. I walked back towards the dining room. Judy was still talking, explaining to Margaret how my walking away was a classic example of male emotional avoidance. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw me. She looked at me, then at her phone, where a little loading symbol was now spinning. "Did the Wi-Fi go out?" she asked, a hint of annoyance in her voice. I stood in the doorway. "No," I said, my voice even. "I turned it off." Her mouth fell open. She stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. Margaret looked from me to her, a confused and worried expression on her face. "Ted? What's going on?" I looked straight at Judy. "You're right," I said. "You made me realize something tonight. I am complicit." Her expression shifted from shock to a flicker of smug satisfaction. She thought she'd won. "I'm complicit in providing you with a comfortable bubble where you can learn to hate the very system that provides it," I continued. "A system that allows you to be completely disconnected from the reality of how the world actually works. So, I'm making a change. I'm taking my moral responsibility seriously. As of tonight, my patriarchal support system is being dismantled." I took my wallet out of my back pocket. I opened it and pulled out the emergency credit card I had given her. "First, this." I put the card on the table. Then I took out my phone. I opened my banking app. It took me about 20 seconds. "And second, your monthly allowance has been canceled, effective immediately." Judy's face went from smug to pale. "And finally," I said, putting my phone away, "your cell phone plan, which is part of my family plan, will be terminated at the end of the current billing cycle. That's in 3 days." The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Judy just stared at me, speechless. It was the first time I'd seen her without a pre-programmed response in over a year. Margaret whispered, "Ted, you can't be serious." I looked at my daughter, whose entire world was crumbling behind her eyes. "I've never been more serious in my life," I said. "Judy, you wanted me to apologize for my privilege. I'm doing better than that. I'm liberating you from it." And with that, I picked up my plate from the table, took it to the kitchen sink, and left them sitting there in the deafening silence. Part 1 was over. Part 2 of her education was about to begin. The first sound was a shriek, not of fear, but of pure, undiluted rage. It came from the dining room, a raw, primal sound that I hadn't heard since she was a toddler and didn't get the toys she wanted. Then came the stomping, the sound of her feet pounding up the stairs, followed by her bedroom door slamming so hard I think it shook the whole house. Margaret appeared in the kitchen doorway a moment later, her face pale. "Ted, for heaven's sake," she whispered, her hands trembling slightly. "What have you done?" I finished rinsing my plate and put it in the dishwasher. "I did what needed to be done," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The way we were going, we were losing her. Maybe we already had. By cutting her off from the world, how is that going to help?" she pleaded. "She wasn't in the world," I replied, turning to face her. "She was in an online bubble, and it was making her miserable and mean. I just popped it." The argument went on for a while. It was one of the most serious we've ever had. Margaret is a good woman with a kind heart. She sees the best in people, especially her own daughter. She saw my actions as cruel, punitive. I saw them as necessary, a course correction, a controlled demolition of a dangerously flawed structure. Upstairs, the screaming had started again. I could hear her through the floorboards, yelling into her phone, presumably to one of her friends, using the last dregs of her cellular data. I heard words like tyrant and abuse and control. She was describing me, her father, in terms I'm sure she'd previously reserved for historical dictators. It was a strange feeling, being vilified in your own house. But underneath the hurt, there was a sense of rightness, of a necessary, if painful, medical procedure being performed. The next day was a Saturday. A heavy, oppressive silence filled the house. Judy didn't come out of her room, not for breakfast, not for lunch. Margaret tried knocking on her door, leaving a plate of food outside like for a prisoner. Judy's response was to slide the plate back out an hour later, untouched. This was her new weapon, martyrdom. I spent the day doing chores, mowing the lawn, fixing a loose cabinet hinge, cleaning the gutters, physical work, simple, honest tasks with clear results. It helped me clear my head. Every time I walked past the silent router in my office, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. On Sunday, her strategy shifted. She emerged from her room, her eyes red and puffy. She didn't speak to me. She didn't even look at me. She went straight to her mother, who was sitting in the living room trying to read a book. She sat down next to her and just started to cry, softly, pathetically. It was a calculated performance, and it was brilliant. She spoke to Margaret in a hushed, trembling voice, telling her how scared and isolated she felt, how she couldn't believe her own father could be so cruel. She was trying to divide us, to turn my wife against me. I stayed in the kitchen, drinking my coffee, listening to the whole thing. Margaret was wavering. I could hear it in her voice as she tried to comfort Judy. Later that evening, after Judy had retreated back to her room, Margaret came to me. "Ted, maybe you could just turn the internet back on," she suggested. "Just for a little while. This is breaking her heart." "It's not her heart that's broken," I said. "It's her addiction. And we're going through withdrawal. We have to stay the course." I explained my thinking again, calmly, rationally. I told her, "She's been living on a diet of pure poison, and we've been paying the grocery bill. That has to stop. We have to let the poison get out of her system." She didn't like it, but she didn't argue further. I think deep down, she knew I was right. Monday was the big day, the end of the billing cycle. I didn't have to do anything. The system was automated. At some point in the afternoon, her phone, which had already been without Wi-Fi for 2.5 days, lost its data connection entirely. It was now just a device for making calls and sending basic texts. A brick, by her standards. The rage that followed was even more intense than Friday nights. She came storming downstairs, holding the phone out like it was evidence in a murder trial. "It's gone," she seethed, her eyes boring into me. "My data is gone. You actually did it." "I told you I would," I said calmly. "This is unbelievable. You're trying to control me, to isolate me from my friends." "Your friends aren't the ones paying your bills," I pointed out. "When they start doing that, you can listen to them. Until then, you live under my roof. You live by my rules." She held my gaze for a long moment, her whole body vibrating with anger. I didn't flinch. I just looked back at her. This wasn't about winning an argument anymore. This was about reestablishing the fundamental reality of our relationship. I was the parent, she was the child. She spun around and left, slamming the front door behind her. She was gone for hours. Margaret was a nervous wreck, pacing the floor. I was worried too, of course, but I knew this was part of the process. She came back long after dark. She didn't say where she'd been. She just walked past us and went back up to her room. The next few weeks were a war of attrition. A cold war, fought with silence and angry glares. Judy was trapped. Without internet at home and without data on her phone, her world had shrunk dramatically. She could use the Wi-Fi at coffee shops or the library, but that required effort. She couldn't just lie in bed and scroll for hours. Her digital IV drip had been removed, and then the reality of money began to hit her. Her car needed gas. She wanted to buy coffee with her friends, simple things. But her allowance was gone. The bank of Dad was closed. She tried asking her mother for money behind my back. I had already spoken to Margaret about this. I told her that for this to work, we had to be a united front. It was the hardest thing I ever had to ask of her, to say no to her own child. But she did it. After about a week of this, Judy realized that her situation was not going to magically resolve itself. If she wanted money, she was going to have to earn it. The job hunt was a brutal awakening for her. She had this vague notion that because she was a college student, she was somehow above working a menial job. She applied for a few internships she found on a library computer, things that sounded impressive but were unpaid and required a full-time commitment. Reality hit her like a ton of bricks. She had no experience, no specialized skills, and an attitude of entitlement that I'm sure was visible from a mile away. I saw the rejection emails she left on the printer. After a dozen failures, desperation began to set in. She finally started applying for actual jobs, the kind you don't list on a resume: cashier at a grocery store, scooping ice cream, waiting tables. She came home one afternoon, looking defeated. She told her mother that she'd had an interview at a local coffee shop. The manager, a woman probably only a few years older than her, had asked her a simple question. "Why do you want to work here?" Judy, in her infinite wisdom, had decided this was a good time to lecture the manager about the exploitative nature of service industry labor under late-stage capitalism. She didn't get the job. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She was learning a lesson that no textbook could ever teach her. The world does not care about your ideology. The world cares about what you can do. Can you show up on time? Can you be pleasant to customers? Can you mop a floor without complaining? Finally, she got a job. She was hired as a waitress at a family restaurant on the other side of town, the kind of place with sticky menus and endless coffee refills. Her first day was a trial by fire. She came home late, her feet aching, her hair smelling of fried food. She collapsed onto a kitchen chair and didn't speak for 10 minutes. She had a small stain on her shirt, ketchup probably. I saw a blister forming on her heel. She had a handful of cash from her tips. It was crumpled and greasy. She smoothed it out on the table. $27 for 8 hours of work. She stared at that small pile of money for a long time. I didn't say a word. I just made her a cup of tea. Something changed after that first week of work. The angry, defiant energy was gone. It was replaced by a deep, profound exhaustion. She'd come home, eat in silence, take a shower, and go to sleep. Her grand theories about systemic oppression were no match for the reality of a double shift. She learned about the patriarchy firsthand. She learned that it looked a lot like her manager, a tired single mom named Brenda who didn't have time for excuses. She learned about toxic masculinity from the line cooks, who were mostly just stressed out guys trying to get through the dinner rush without burning anything. She learned about economic exploitation when a table of teenagers left her a $1 tip on a $50 check. Her life was no longer a theoretical exercise. It was real. It was hard. The atmosphere in the house began to improve, slowly. There were no more lectures at the dinner table. She was too tired to lecture. Sometimes she would even talk about her day. She'd complain about a rude customer or a mistake she made with an order. They were small, normal conversations. But they felt like a massive breakthrough. She paid for her own phone plan. She went to the mobile store, stood in line, and handed over her hard-earned cash. I saw the receipt on her dresser. It was a big chunk of her first paycheck. The look on her face when she realized that was the price of being connected, it was something to see. A few more months passed. A routine developed. School, work, sleep. She was still Judy. She still had her opinions. But they were quieter now, less certain, tempered by experience. The turning point, the real one, came one night in the fall. I was in the garage, changing the oil in her car. It's something I'd always done for her. She came out to get something and saw me under the hood. She just stood there for a minute, watching me. I finished up, wiped my hands on a rag, and started to put my tools away. "You know," she said, her voice quiet, "you don't have to do that." "It's fine," I said. "It needs to be done." "No, I mean," she hesitated. "I can pay to get it done at a shop now." I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. "I know," I said, "but a shop would charge you $70. This cost me 20 minutes and a bit of oil. It's more efficient." She didn't move. She was looking at my hands, which were covered in grease. "I was a jerk," she said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I waited. "That night," she clarified, "at dinner, all those times before. I didn't get it," she stammered. "I was reading all this stuff, and it all made sense in my head. A simple explanation for everything. But it's not simple, is it?" She shook her head, looking at the garage floor. "No, it's not. I was disrespectful to you, and to Mom. I took everything for granted. The house, the money, everything. I'm sorry." It wasn't a surrender. She wasn't renouncing her entire belief system. It was something better. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition of a reality beyond her theories. It was the apology I had actually wanted all along, not for being a man, but for her being an ungrateful child. "I know," I said, and I put a hand on her shoulder. We stood there for a moment in the quiet garage, smelling the faint scent of oil and gasoline. It felt like the fever had finally broken. The next day I turned the Wi-Fi back on. We had a talk. We set some new rules. She would continue to work part-time. She would pay for her own personal expenses. We would contribute to her tuition, but she would have to take out a small loan to cover the rest. So she had some skin in the game. We would treat each other with respect. No more lectures, no more personal attacks. She agreed to all of it. Our family isn't perfect now. She'll still say things sometimes that make me roll my eyes. And I'm sure I still do things that she considers problematic. But the war is over. She sees me as her father again. Not as a symbol, not as a political construct, but as the guy who works hard, who pays the bills, who knows how to change her oil. I didn't destroy her worldview. I just forced it to collide with the real world. And in the process, I think I got my daughter back.